July 19th, 1918. The USS San Diego goes down off Long Island, the largest American warship lost in World War I. 55 sailors dead. Over a century later, she is still taking lives. 6 divers have entered her inverted hull since 1994 and never come back alive. When the Navy finally measured the atmosphere trapped inside those sealed compartments, they found hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide, and methane at levels that can silently shut a man down before he even knows something is wrong. The dive community calls her haunted, but what the evidence actually reveals is something no ghost story can explain, and it starts with what a century of decay has been quietly building inside that ship. Before she became a legendary wreck at the bottom of the Atlantic, this ship was a proud symbol of America's rising global reach. She began her life not as the San Diego, but as the armored cruiser USS California, designated ACR-6. Workers laid her keel in the opening year of the century, 1900, at the Union Iron Works in San Francisco, shaping her as part of the Pennsylvania class, a fleet designed to project American influence across the oceans. This was an era of profound naval transition, and the California represented the critical bridge between the old coal-burning Navy of the Spanish-American War and the heavily armored, steam-driven giants that would soon dominate the modern dreadnought era. With a length of over 500 feet and a displacement exceeding 13,000 tons, she was a massive steel fortress. Heavily armored belts up to 6 inches thick protected her waterline, while a formidable battery of 6-inch and 8-inch guns lined her decks. She was commissioned in 1907, serving as a powerful, reassuring presence in the Pacific Fleet, eventually earning the honor of becoming its flagship. But her identity would shift. In September 1914, to free up her state name for a new class of super dreadnought battleships, the Navy officially renamed her the USS San Diego. When the United States entered the First World War in April 1917, the newly christened cruiser received orders to join the Atlantic Fleet. Her mission transformed overnight from patrolling peaceful Pacific waters to the grueling, high-stakes demands of escorting troop and supply convoys across the submarine-infested Atlantic. As the primary protective escort for the essential shipping lanes connecting New York to the port of Brest, France, the San Diego performed her duties with distinction, guiding critical cargo ships and troop transport vessels through the most dangerous waters of the European theater. By mid-1918, she had successfully escorted multiple convoys, her crew of over 800 men hardened by months of constant vigilance against German U-boats. This intense wartime service defined her final crossing, grounding her legacy in the official records of the United States Navy long before she ever became a silent, rusted tomb on the ocean floor. On the morning of July 19, 1918, the USS San Diego was steaming through calm waters just 10 miles south of Fire Island, New York. Her crew was alert, but the danger lay hidden beneath the surface. At 11:05 in the morning, a violent explosion tore through her port side, adjacent to the engine room. She had struck a naval mine, stealthily laid by the German submarine U-156. The blast was catastrophic, rupturing the hull and triggering immediate, uncontrollable flooding in the machinery spaces. Within minutes, rising seawater killed the engines, cut off electrical power, and silenced internal communications. Captain Harley H. Christie quickly realized the ship could not be saved and ordered his crew to abandon ship. Only 28 minutes after the initial impact, the massive armored cruiser capsized and sank into the Atlantic, taking 55 sailors down with her. As the San Diego descended, the physics of her design dictated her final resting posture. The heavy steel armor along her decks made her top-heavy, while the air trapped in her lower compartments kept her hull buoyant. This caused the ship to roll completely over before striking the seabed. She settled onto the sandy bottom at a depth of 110 feet, resting entirely upside down. Her massive keel now pointed toward the surface, while her entire superstructure lay crushed beneath 13,000 tons of inverted steel. This violent plunge instantly turned the active warship into a static, highly disorienting geographical feature. The inversion scrambled the ship's interior geometry. Coal bunkers, crew quarters, and ammunition rooms were flipped on their heads, turning standard passages into vertical shafts and floors into ceilings. Today, the wreck is a protected military war grave preserved under federal law. Yet, the very factors that made her a historical monument also turned her into a severe technical challenge. The cold, dark Atlantic waters preserved her steel hull, but they also sealed her compartments, freezing a hostile, pitch-black labyrinth in time. For the generations of divers who would later discover the wreck, the San Diego offered an almost irresistible opportunity to penetrate a largely intact relic of the Great War. But the same sudden violence that preserved the ship beneath the waves had also trapped a silent, structural danger deep within her inverted corridors. The true nature of the danger inside the USS San Diego is preserved in the sterile, carbon-copied pages of official federal files. To find the truth, investigators bypass local mythology and look directly at primary source materials: the Navy Casualty Database, the salvage logs of the Supervisor of Salvage and Diving, commonly known as SUPSALV, and Regional Medical Examiner records. These files, archived under federal law, function as the primary authority, turning a legendary wreck into a definable forensic case file. For decades, stories circulated within the Northeast diving community claiming that 30 or 40 divers had lost their lives inside the inverted hull. However, official reviews of these incidents corrected and reduced those early inflated public estimates. When federal agencies and local authorities cross-referenced the state agency databases and military logs, they established a verified, audited total of exactly 6 documented diving deaths. The official paper trail for these 6 fatalities spans from 1989 to 2022. While some technical databases focus primarily on the modern era between 1994 and 2022, the complete timeline of verified losses actually began 5 years prior. Each of these 6 deaths represents a concrete event, documented through rigorous investigation rather than waterfront rumors. When a diving accident occurs at the wreck, a highly structured, multidisciplinary protocol begins. The Coast Guard and Navy salvage teams secure the area, preserve the site, and retrieve the equipment. The local medical examiner conducts a forensic autopsy, searching for biomarkers of exposure or pressure-related trauma, while hyperbaric experts reconstruct the dive profile using depth time logs and gas mix records. Every piece of life support gear is inspected for mechanical failure, ensuring that the final report relies on hard engineering data. This paper trail matters because it anchors the mystery of the San Diego in verifiable ground. By relying on official files rather than maritime folklore, the tragedies of the wreck are stripped of speculative sensationalism. The 6 recovered files outline a sequence of real physical events documented by medical examiners and salvage engineers, offering a clear, forensic look at what happens to a human body inside the dark corridors of the sunken cruiser. The deaths on the San Diego occur in tightly clustered areas inside the sealed steel hull. Every recovery operation points back to specific, isolated compartments within the ship's inverted architecture. When plotted onto the original 1900 builder's schematics, the coordinates of these incidents reveal a clear spatial pattern. The fatalities occur almost exclusively between 76 and 84 feet of depth, inside a highly complex, upside-down steel maze. Each of these locations presents a distinct physical profile, transforming specific areas of the ship into isolated pockets of extreme hazard. In the forward section of the vessel, the chain locker inside the second hold and the adjacent forward magazine in the third hold form the first major cluster. Here, the structural collapse of the bow has warped the steel frames, turning the narrow vertical access shafts into jagged bottlenecks. Divers moving through these spaces must squeeze through collapsing overhead plating where the margin for safety is measured in inches. Further midships, the risk profile shifts to the massive engineering spaces. The portside engine room, situated 82 feet down in the fifth hold, represents a vast, multi-level cavern of machinery, pipes, and hanging cables. Because the ship is inverted, the heavy steam boilers and engines hang precariously above the diver's path, while the floor consists of rusted overhead walkways. Nearby, the tight, maze-like corridors of the officers' quarters on the upper deck present a completely different challenge, characterized by a series of identical, repeating doorways that easily induce disorientation. Toward the stern, the danger concentrates within the aft torpedo room and the interior of the gun turrets. These low compartments, located in the lower decks of the 11th hold, are heavily silted and almost entirely sealed from ocean currents. A single misplaced fin kick in these spaces instantly obliterates visibility, suspending fine sediment that takes hours to settle. By mapping these recovery sites, the wreck ceases to be a vague, open water threat. Instead, it becomes a defined network of structural traps, where the physical layout of each compartment dictates its own lethal mechanics. These incidents share operational patterns that transcend simple bad luck. The individuals who descended onto the wreck were not reckless amateurs. They were highly trained professionals, salvage specialists, and scientific researchers undertaking demanding, calculated tasks. Many of these missions began in the early morning, often between 3 a.m. and 7 a.m., a time when darkness underwater is absolute and reliance on artificial lighting is total. The tasks they performed, whether conducting structural inspections, collecting biological samples, or recovering historic artifacts, required intense focus, physical strength, and repeated runs into the tightest spaces of the hull. To sustain these prolonged runs, the operators relied on diverse life support setups. Some utilized standard surface-supplied air systems with heavy communication lines, while others opted for advanced closed-circuit rebreathers. Both setups offered extended bottom times, but they also introduced distinct physical and technical complications. Inside the inverted hull, the margin for safety quickly shrank to zero. Even minor equipment glitches or slight navigational errors became magnified. A single snagged line, a temporary loss of communication, or a brief moment of disorientation could turn a routine task into a fight for survival. This operational environment reveals that even the most competent divers face extreme vulnerability when a closed space narrows their choices. The question then shifts from where these fatalities occurred to the exact technical and physiological failures that triggered them. When the San Diego settled upside down on the ocean floor, her massive steel hull became a giant pressurized chemical reactor. Over more than a century, the trapped pockets of air and water inside the sealed compartments have undergone a slow, toxic change. This is not a static tomb of rusted metal, but a highly active, oxygen-depleted environment driven by decay, corrosion, and microscopic life. The ship sank with her coal oil fuel, lubricants, and ammunition fully intact. In the darkness, anaerobic bacteria, microbes that thrive without oxygen, began breaking down these organic materials, consuming sulfate from seawater, and digesting the remaining fuels. This metabolic process produces high concentrations of hydrogen sulfide gas. Inside the forward magazine and the engine rooms, scientists have measured hydrogen sulfide levels between 12 and 30 parts per million. For context, federal safety guidelines set the maximum safe limit for human exposure at just 10 parts per million. Hydrogen sulfide is a potent neurotoxin, and at these concentrations it can corrode electronic contacts, destroy equipment, and, if inhaled, cause rapid unconsciousness. At the same time, the slow decomposition of nitrocellulose-based propellants and explosives inside the flooded magazines releases carbon monoxide. Measurements within the chain locker and officers' quarters show carbon monoxide concentrations ranging from 45 to 70 parts per million, well above permissible exposure limits. Decaying organic silt and fuel residues also generate methane gas, with readings inside the central void and torpedo rooms reaching between 150 and 300 parts per million. Volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, also saturate the air pockets throughout the holds, presenting a toxic mixture of petroleum-derived vapors. For an unsuspecting diver penetrating the interior, these gases present a lethal hazard. In many of the upper compartments, water has displaced the original air, but the remaining trapped air pockets are highly concentrated. If a diver makes the mistake of removing their regulator to breathe what appears to be an air pocket, or if a slow leak in their breathing system allows these gases to contaminate their supply, the physiological effects are swift. Before the diver can comprehend what changed, these toxins attack the central nervous system, causing sudden disorientation, cognitive decline, or a complete loss of consciousness. The ship itself generates the very poison that silences those who venture inside her hull. Moving through the interior of an inverted armored cruiser introduces a brutal exercise in spatial geometry. When a ship of this era capsizes, the basic architecture of its passageways flips upside down, transforming structural design into a mechanical labyrinth. In a standard upright vessel, escape routes lead upward toward the weather decks and open air. On the inverted seabed, every natural instinct to ascend drives a diver further into the double bottoms, coal bunkers, and sealed bilge voids. The physical paths do not merely change orientation, they progressively narrow. Structural bulkheads designed to withstand lateral forces become horizontal barriers, while overhead ventilation trunks and steam lines sag downward, snagging manifolds and hoses. As a diver moves further into these spaces, the physical clearance often shrinks to a matter of inches, restricting turning radius and making a quick exit physically impossible. This physical confinement is immediately compounded by the physical reality of underwater sediment. Over a century of immersion in the Atlantic has allowed fine, clay-like silt to wash through hull cracks and settle thick across every flat surface inside the wreck. This material is incredibly light, undisturbed by the sweeping ocean currents that wash over the outer hull. The moment a diver enters a closed compartment, the displacement of water from their movement, even the gentle wash from a single fin kick, stirs the sediment into the water column. Visibility drops from 10 feet to absolute zero in a matter of seconds. This is not a gradual haziness, it is an immediate, impenetrable blackout that swallows artificial light. When a powerful dive light reflects off a wall of suspended silt, it creates a blinding white glare, erasing all sense of direction. In these conditions, a diver cannot rely on sight to find an exit. They must orient themselves purely by touch, feeling along cold, jagged steel plates while trying to preserve a physical guideline that can easily become entangled in the surrounding debris. Adding to this sensory deprivation is the active deterioration of the ship's structural steel. Built at the turn of the 20th century, the vessel's hull relies on carbon steel framing and rivets that have spent more than 100 years in saltwater. Salvage engineers recognize that marine corrosion operates continuously, slowly eating away at the load-bearing beams and bulkheads. The weight of the inverted machinery, armor plating, and accumulated mud exerts constant downward pressure on weakened supports. A diver's physical presence, or even the rising bubbles from their breathing gas collecting in overhead voids, can dislodge fragile scale rust or trigger a localized structural collapse. If a single bulkhead buckles or a heavy overhead plate shifts, it can instantly block the narrow exit path. Unlike modern vessels designed with escape hatches, these older warships were built to contain damage behind watertight doors, meaning a collapse in one space leaves no alternative route out. The structural decay of the steel does not just create a risk of physical trauma, it seals the space entirely, turning a temporary exploration into a permanent airless confinement. Breathing standard air at 70 feet down changes the blood's chemistry. Under 3 atmospheres of pressure, nitrogen acts as an anesthetic on the brain. This inert gas dissolves into nerve membranes, slowing down synaptic responses and inducing nitrogen narcosis. It starts as a subtle warmth or a slight delay in reading a depth gauge, but inside the dark corridors of the San Diego, this mild euphoria quickly turns into a dangerous cognitive lag. A diver might look at a safety guideline and struggle to remember which direction leads to the exit. Even the most rigorous training cannot prevent this chemical impairment. It is a hard physical limit of human physiology. For technical divers, using advanced closed-circuit rebreathers to bypass narcosis, the pressure introduces a different, more volatile threat. These systems constantly adjust the gas mixture to maintain a precise partial pressure of oxygen. If a diver works hard against a current or panics in a tight space, their carbon dioxide levels rise, which can trigger an oxygen spike. Exceeding a partial pressure of 1.4 atmospheres of oxygen risks triggering central nervous system toxicity. Without warning, the diver's body can go into violent, uncontrollable seizures, a catastrophic event that leads to immediate drowning inside a full-face mask. The physical environment of the inverted warship acts as a force multiplier for these biological failures. The thousands of tons of early 20th century carbon steel create a massive magnetic shield. Standard dive compasses experience extreme deviation inside these highly ferrous spaces, spinning uselessly and stripping a diver of their primary directional reference. Simultaneously, the dense metal bulkheads block or absorb ultrasonic signals, causing sudden, total communication dropouts with the surface support vessel. When a diver's primary light fails, often short-circuited by the corrosive chemistry of the stagnant water, the sensory isolation becomes absolute. These technical and physical failures do not happen in isolation. They target a diver who is already biochemically compromised by depth, cold, and stress. The cold Atlantic water constantly saps body heat, forcing the heart to work harder and accelerating gas consumption. Inside the San Diego, there is no room for recovery. The inverted hull demands perfect execution, punishing minor mistakes with absolute finality. The official archives of the United States Navy contain no records of a curse, no entries of paranormal activity, and no warnings of supernatural danger guarding the inverted hull of the USS San Diego. Yet, along the docks of Long Island and inside the cabins of charter boats, a different history has taken root. This history is built on whispers, shared memories, and the human need to find meaning in tragedy. For nearly 80 years after the cruiser sank, the wreck remained a strictly historical and technical challenge. But as the losses mounted in the late 20th century, the language surrounding the ship began to shift. The earliest trace of a haunted narrative did not appear until 1998, when an article in the Suffolk Times titled "Ghosts of the San Diego, Divers Speak of Unseen Presence" first put these rumors into print. In that account, veteran diver Larry "Shark" McAllister described experiencing an unseen presence within the Forward magazine. He spoke of hearing metallic footsteps echoing through the flooded passages and catching glimpses of shadowy figures moving through the silt. 2 years later, in 2000, Long Island Public Radio broadcasted these stories to a wider audience, using dramatic retellings that captured the local imagination. By 2003, the Atlantic Wreck Divers newsletter, Wreck Watch, was regularly sharing stories of the captain's voice, warning explorers to turn back, and dive lights flickering on their own in the deepest compartments. These stories belong to the folklore of the diving community rather than the official record. When humans confront a hostile environment where a single mistake can end a life, they often project their fears outward. A curse provides a narrative framework for the unpredictable. A loose steel plate shifting in the current becomes metallic footsteps. The sudden failure of a dive light caused by the corrosive, sulfide-rich water becomes the work of a ghostly crew. The real dangers of the wreck created these legends. The stories reflect the psychological weight of exploring a steel tomb. By keeping these tales alive, the diving community honors the memory of those who died while building a modern mythology around a place that demands absolute respect. The persistence of these legends stems from an innately human response to an environment that offers no margin for error. For those who work and play in high-risk professions, ghost stories often serve as an essential, informal safety language. Wreck divers and sailors operate in a realm where the dangers are immense, yet frequently invisible. You cannot see the carbon monoxide pocket waiting in an upside-down compartment, nor can you easily map the structural decay of century-old steel until it shifts. When the physical senses are overwhelmed, maritime superstition steps in to fill the void, translating a cold, technical hazard into a narrative that demands immediate attention. Historically, high-stress communities have used folklore to cope with trauma and manage the psychological weight of sudden, violent loss. On a military ship or a sunken wreck, every tragedy leaves a scar on the collective memory of those who return. When a diver hears of a predecessor who never made it out of the engine room, that loss becomes a shared burden. Passing down tales of footsteps in the dark or warnings whispered through the water column is a way of keeping those lost comrades present while reinforcing the vital rules of survival. It is an oral tradition where meaning is valued as highly as technical data. A checklist might tell a diver to monitor his gas, but a ghost story reminds him of the human cost of negligence. This cultural process allows legends to grow directly from real, documented losses without surrendering the hard facts of forensic science. The physical reality of the San Diego, the toxic gas, the blinding silt, and the disorienting upside-down layout remains the true source of danger. Yet, the haunting talk persists because it honors the gravity of the place. It respects the 55 sailors who went down with the cruiser in 1918 and the 6 divers who perished in the decades that followed. By framing the wreck as a haunted space, the diving community preserves a necessary boundary of fear and respect around a site that is, ultimately, a massive steel grave. The mystery remains, not because the laws of physics have failed, but because the human mind requires a story to process the dark. Today, the silent hull of the San Diego remains a sovereign military grave. The true mystery isn't the structural traps or the toxic gases within her steel maze. It is our own relentless drive to conquer the forbidden, even when the price is survival. As long as she rests in the dark, the sea will demand respect or take another life. What do you think draws us to these dangerous depths? Share your thoughts below.